And now to introduce our speaker. I first met Dr. Lewis after her presentation to the Colorado Springs Rotary Club. Later last year, she was the speaker at my club, the North Colorado Springs Rotary Club. After hearing her presentations, I knew that she would be a wonderful, wonderful keynote speaker at this year's PETS. In talking with Regina, I learned that she has worked with executives, groups, and organizations in many countries, including Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Hong Kong, China, not recently though, right? Ethiopia, Vietnam, Brazil, and of course, the United States. Regina's expertise in diversity and inclusion and cultural competence are two of the subjects I have heard her present. Regina holds a doctorate in educational leadership, research, and policy, a Master's of Arts in Communication, Bachelor of Arts in Communication, and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, all earned at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. Regina's work in the area of diversity and inclusion has become an award-winning program. Additionally, her publications can be found in books, reference journals, and educational textbooks. Dr. Lewis is currently the department chair and a professor of communication at Pikes Peak Community College and an executive coach for the Center on Creative Leadership. Dr. Lewis is a veteran who served during wartime in the United States Air Force. I ask, hoorah! Yeah. I ask all to please give a very, very warm Rotary welcome to Dr. Regina Lewis.
Thank you. Wow, what a great introduction. So, before I really get started, there's something very important that I need to say to all of you, and that is that I start thinking about diversity training and cultural inclusivity, and I have a problem with it. And my problem with it is just merely that if any of you have ever gone through any type of diversity training, it seems like, one, when we leave, then it becomes the Band-Aid of change. As soon as the Band-Aid is taken off, it's gone. We don't know how to apply it. That's number one. Number two, it seems very exhausting because when we leave or while we're there, it seems to be a lot of finger pointing and blaming and shaming and counting and victimization and marginalization, and it's just not working. There needs to be a change. The change is today. And I want to make it very, very clear that as I look through this room, I don't see a lot of shades. It feels like a few chips in the cookie. I'm just saying. However, even though that's the case, I was a Rotarian. And there was never a time that I walked in that I didn't feel welcome. There was never a time that I was not supported. There was never a time that individuals did not reach out to me and say, how can I help you? This was important to me. I never walked in and felt like I was the oddball. I was a part of. I'm standing here today in the position that I am in, and a great part of that was the Rotarians that was around me. I got to rub shoulders and have conversations with people that seemed to be far out of my reach. And when I was asked to present on this, I realized that we have a deeper message to deliver, a message that all of us are a part of. I want to have a discussion about unconscious bias, or better said, unintentional bias, that we're going to have a conversation about today. I think it's really important. So as Chip had introduced me, there's a couple more things that I'd like to add to that resume of information. I am now the Special Assistant to the President for Academic Excellence and Inclusion because at our college there seems to be this dust being kicked up in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And people have questions, people have concerns, and they need a place and a space to have that conversation. Because usually, when you're talking about inclusivity, everybody's included until you disagree. There needs to be a respected space. So I tell them to come join me for a cup of tea, and we have a great conversation. In addition to that, just yesterday I got a notice that I'm now instructor for Purdue University. So these are really exciting times. So I want to take you back to a time when I was in the war. So here I was in Desert Storm, and I'm running with some buddies. We're trying to get into our bunkers, because the sirens went off, and it said, when you hear the sirens, that means that there could be chemicals in the air, and if there are, you might not be able to see them, taste them, smell them, touch them. So we're running for our life under conditions in which were unknown. And I thought that that was probably the most defining moment in my life. That is until May 28th, 2014, 9 a.m. It was at that moment that my son Charles ran up the stairs from the Air Force Academy, grabbing me, almost lifting me off of my feet, and whispering in my ear, "Mom, we did it." See, my son had just graduated top 10% of the Air Force Academy. Oh yes, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And I thought I was going to lose my mind. Now, just 13 years earlier than that was probably the saddest day of my life, because that was the day that my son was named one of the youngest public speakers in our nation, as he went up to the podium too tall for him to see over. And he delivered the eulogy for his father's funeral. See, just 2 weeks prior to that, when he was 8, he ran home and he said, "Mom, I know what I want to be when I grow up." And I said, "What's that, Charles?" Now, I'm thinking in my head, please don't say a basketball player, you will never be tall enough. But I did not say that. I just smiled. "Oh, what is it, Charles?" He says, "I want to be an astronaut. I want to go to the Air Force Academy." And I was choked up because I was thinking when I was his age, all I could think about is, could I get a doll baby that had brown skin and that had real hair, instead of that, molded stuff? And I said, "Man, if you do this, you're going to leave a legacy in this family." But just 2 weeks after that, when 3 soldiers showed up at our home and let us know that his father was on a mission by then President Clinton to search for the body remains from the Vietnam War that took place in the 60s and 70s in Vietnam, that he, 9 Americans, and 11 Vietnamese soldiers all died that day when their plane crashed into the side of the mountain. When they shared that with my son, he was devastated. And it's gut-wrenching as a parent to see your child have to go through something so deep. It was painful. And when my son stood up and he said, "My father did not die of a drive-by or drugs, he died a hero." And I'm looking at my son, and I realized that in that instant, he was about to become a daunting statistic in our society. And it goes like this: young black male in a single-parent home has a higher chance of going to jail, being part of a gang, dropping out of school, than he ever does of graduating from high school, let alone go to the Air Force Academy. I could not let that happen to my baby, not this one. So I looked at him and I said, I'm going to have to do more than motivate you. I'm going to have to inspire you. See, when you motivate someone, then they react to what it is that you're saying. But when the feeling fades, when they no longer can feel it or see it, they lose motivation. But when you teach them the tools, you show them how to do it, you can inspire them, because when you inspire someone, then they now can respond. And they hold this on for life. So I said, I'm not going to leave it to you to leave a legacy. I'm going to lead the legacy, and I'm going back to school. And I'm not going to stop until I have a PhD. But I need for you to follow me to see what it is to be disciplined, dedicated, and determined. See, Dr. John Hope Franklin says that many of us have the ability to obtain several degrees, but few of us have the discipline to gain one. I says, I'm going to show you what it's like, and I'm going to make sure that I graduate and have my PhD before you graduate from high school, and then you have to promise me that you'll get into the academy. So the journey began, and I started at the very college that I've been the associate dean, I've been chair, I've been the special assistant to the president, that very school. But it was that very school that I struggled. I struggled with reading comprehension and writing sentences grammatically correct. I had to sit with 7th and 8th graders, and it made me mad because they were picking on me. I said, I'll see you on the playground. I know I was 30-something, but oh well. Mess with me, right? But I picked up my skills, and the journey began. And it was Rotarians such as Bart Givens who believed in me. And he says, Regina, I know you're not here to get a hand out. You're looking for a hand up. And Wayne Bland, who said, come on with me. I'm going to take you to the Rotary Club. And I didn't know what that, I thought we was going to be cranking something. I didn't know what was happening. But I did. And before I knew it, 6 days before my son was graduating from high school, he got to see what less than 1% of children in his position ever get to see, and that was his mother getting her PhD. Thank you. Now, when I got this PhD, I was sitting there ready for them to call my name. I was proud. And all of a sudden, I hear them say, Dr. Regina, Anita, Lewis, and I was like, oh, the party's about to begin. I start going up the stage, and I look over, and in the crowd was this big yellow sign that said Dr. Lewis, and holding it was my son and the people from the grocery store and the hairdresser, and, just everybody. And I cried. I cried up the stage, across the stage, back down the stage. The cameraman was like, can I take your picture? I was like, no. I cried so ugly that day. Don't ever cry ugly. I was like, you know what? If you don't learn anything else today, learn how to cry cute. Oh, I learned that very well. I have no proof the day ever happened, right? So then finally, 6 days later, it's my son's turn, and he's getting dressed, and at the school he was going to, and it was interesting because he was going to a private school that was paid for through the Oprah Winfrey Show. It was crazy. And here he was. He says, Mom, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, sure, son. He says, you know that big yellow robe you wore to my graduation? I said, yes. He said, don't wear it to my graduation. I says, and why not? He said, because you look like a big bumblebee. I said, that's exactly what I was trying to do. I said, because a bumblebee never flies in a straight line, but it always hits its target. I says, and according to the law, a bumblebee should not be able to fly because its wings are paper thin, too thin to carry its heavy body, but it does it anyway. I was looking all smart, and he said, very good, but don't wear that yellow robe. Fine. So I wore a beautiful celery green suit with some eggplant shoes. I just had to do me. We go up to the school. The entire time, my mother's nudging me. My sister, don't act a fool. Don't embarrass. I said, do I look like the type that... Don't answer that. So we get up to the school, and I'm watching the kids go by to get their diploma. And it seemed like their parents were clapping with 3 fingers. Good job, Johnny. Nice job, Sarah. I was like, you wait till Charles get up in this house. I can't wait. Suddenly, it was Charles's turn. Now, his principal knew how I was. I was never the helicopter mom. No. I was the Velcro mom. I was right up in it. So he had a good time. He had to lean in. He says, Charles Edward Lewis III. And I said, oh, that's my baby. People are looking like, oh, she's so disgusting. I was like, yes, I am. He walks by me, gives me a little salute. And they said, Charles has been accepted to the Air Force Academy, West Point, Purdue, Embry-Riddle. I mean, they kept naming non-prestigious colleges. I said, now that's my baby. Now, the ritual is that you take a rose and you bring it to your parent. Well, my son managed to get 2. I said, that's my boy. Go ahead. And he starts walking towards me, and then he turns around. I'm like, where's he going with my roses? And he turns around, and he tosses them behind him. So I asked him later, why did you do that? He says, Mom, who could I have given him to? And I'm like, he says, we stand on the shoulders of others. We stand on the shoulders of others. My son was selected, and they paid for him to get his MBA at Duke University. He graduated in May, and now he's an instructor at the Air Force Academy. But it's the rippling effect that when you look and you say service above self, these things happen. And then it circles back around to this. Now, why did I share this story? Yes, to get to know me more. But when I come up here and, you hear my bio, there is some unconscious bias going on. There are assumptions that we make that we don't even realize until the story is told, and it's like, wow, I didn't peg her to be like that, or I didn't think about that. These are the things that happens all the time. I'm not here to talk about different cultural identified groups. I'm not. I'm not here to talk about what we're doing wrong. I'm not here to even separate to say, okay, white people, you're doing it wrong. I'm not. I'm here to say that we all have a responsibility, that we all have unconscious bias or unintentional bias. Even good people have that. And sometimes that can have a negative impact on other people. And what can we do about it? So I invite you to just spend a little bit of time with me as I share some of this information with you. So my definition of unconscious bias, because what I'd like to do is make sure that we have a working definition that we all can understand it the same. And the reason being is because sometimes people use terms that they mean one thing, but it's interpreted another way. And it can create serious issues. If you've ever been called a racist, you know that that can be a very serious accusation. And the person who's calling you that may not mean it the way in which you're getting in trouble by it. So we have to have shared meaning. So our shared definition of unconscious bias is referred to as an inclination or a choice that we are unaware of and which happens outside of our control. It says further that it's basis that happens automatically and is triggered by our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations. Biases are influenced by our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences. The only thing that blows my mind about this is it's like, well, if it's unconscious, how in the world am I supposed to be responsible for it? It's almost like saying, if I passed out right now and I was knocked unconscious and I hit the ground and I hit to the left instead of the right, I'm getting blamed for it. It's crazy. But here's the unfortunate part. It happens. And when it happens, it can really hurt and damage other people. So what do I mean by that? I want you to look at this little diagram here. And I want you to think about a carousel going around, and you know the horses that go up and down. So the green line is like the horses going up and down. These are your biases moving up and down between conscious and unconscious, which we're not even aware of. We don't even know, like sometimes we don't know that we're in an unconscious state of bias. But it's always moving up and down every time that the culture is spinning around. So our culture is ever changing, ever moving. If you shift your eyes even a millimeter, then culture changes. Your perspective changes. You see people differently around you. And then all of a sudden your biases start to change. And now some might say, that's just such a harsh word, bias. Is there ever a positive bias? Yeah, you can be biased towards something, but then there's always the opposite side of that people can be affected by it. And we just don't realize that it's happening. But just know that culture is ever changing. In this room, culture is changing. Every one of us are different. Every one of us have a different experience. So I want you to take a moment. I want you to just look at this video for a minute because this kind of shows how this all works.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. What I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the three of diamonds.
The three of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table. Do a little click of the fingers. And you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick. Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. What I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the three of diamonds.
The three of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table. Do a little click of the fingers. And you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick.
Woo! So how many did you notice? When I saw it, I was like, I don't get it, right? Because I just didn't see anything, right? But this is what happens all the time. You know, just take and think about it this way. The cards that were, being played is what we're focusing on. That is our conscious bias, because that is what we're paying attention to. But unconsciously, there's a lot of stuff that's going on around us that we don't even realize, but it is taking place. And when we act on it, we might not even know, but it could have an impact on other people. So if you look at this model again, you can see, that bias goes through a continuous cultural change. It is moving constantly as our biases are going up and down between conscious and unconscious. So there's some, really interesting information that comes with this. So let's look at this diagram for just a moment. This sliding scale. Hang with me because it seems complex, but it's not, right? So the person that's in the middle is the person that's actually being impacted by your unconscious bias. Impacted by your unconscious bias. And I'll give you some examples in just a moment. That particular person can be highly aware of your unconscious bias or not aware of it at all. And at the same time, that person can be highly impacted by your unconscious bias or not at all. So when we started looking at some of the research at the college, what we found is that students or scholars have a higher and better experience in the classroom when their actual name is being called. No matter how else you call them, if their name is being called, then they have a higher experience, a better experience. So I went into a classroom to observe, because what I do as a chair is all of my adjuncts know that they must call their students by name and know their names within the first 2 weeks. So I go in, and this is towards the end. It was about 2 weeks before the end of the semester, and I went into one of my instructor's classes, and I said, hey, how you doing? And he's fine, and he's interacting with his students, and he's like, hey, Joe, how you doing? And Mary, how you doing? And, he's interacting. And I noticed that every time that he went up to a person of color, he would say, buddy, and how are you doing? And he would give him a fist bump or, wave at him. And they all were interacting. They had such a great time. So the scholars didn't know that they were being impacted. They didn't know. And they didn't really recognize his unconscious bias. But it was there. And it was impacting them according to statistics. So later I had to have this courageous conversation, which I didn't want to, because I adore him. And I know that that was not his intention. I know it wasn't. And I had to be able to have this conversation with him. And I said, hey, and I told him what happened, and he reacted exactly like I thought. One, he was very upset because that was not his intention. Number two, he immediately said he would fix it. He immediately said that. And I appreciated it. So this is how this diagram actually works, that, you don't know all the time that you have this impact. These things take place all the time. When a person is assumed to be the president or in this position just because of maybe their gender, maybe because of the way that they present themselves. And so we make this automatic assumption, not even thinking, and it's really the person next to them. So this kind of unintentional bias happens all the time. So my question to you is, where do you believe your responsibility of the impact of unconscious bias lies for you? So here I've got this triangle. And basically, there are these levels that you could say, you know what, this is where I am or I'm not. So there's this unaware level. And at the unaware level means that, it's unsuspecting. I didn't even know I have unconscious bias. And I'm unskilled, so I don't even know how to begin to be responsible for it. The next one is tolerant. So when you're tolerant, you say, I don't necessarily agree with this unconscious bias. And I really don't believe that I have a responsibility for its impact because it's unconscious. And it's okay for you to decide where you are with this. Except you recognize that unconscious bias is actually valid, and you're willing to receive feedback from somebody else saying, you know what, you impacted me when you did X, Y, Z. And so then you may or may not take on responsibility. The next one is intentional. You are deliberately trying to find your own unconscious bias because you do feel like there's a responsibility in it. Like you're searching. Like, for instance, over here, I'm standing here and I'm having this conversation, and I might be more consciously biased to really focus on my right side, your left side of the room, because I'm always over here, assuming that everybody is getting the same experience, because unconsciously that's what I'm thinking. But as I am thinking, I'm saying, have I been on this side too long? Maybe I need to shift over here a little bit. And as a matter of fact, when I come over here, this side of the room definitely can start to feel a difference, my energy, when I move on this side of the room. So I have to consciously think about that. So that's that intentional. The next one is amend. This is where not only do you find it, but you start to make changes. You really start to adjust how you are. And then you actually own the responsibility. Yes, it is my responsibility regardless of my intention. Being an ally is when you say, you know what, I support this. I support people who actually say, you know, I've been impacted by unintentional bias. And I support them, give advice, I share, and I take on the responsibility. And then lastly is being an activist. When you're an activist, that's when you bring political and social change, and you take on that responsibility. And believe me, it's not comfortable. Let me tell you about that. When you become an activist, an ally is like that egg that we had this morning. Because the chicken, all it had to do was give up an egg, right? But an activist is somebody who is the bacon on the plate. You got to kind of give up some of you. And it's not always comfortable. I know, it's poor pig. Sorry, but the pig was an activist. You know, I want to feed the world. You did. So that's what happens. So for yourself, think about where you are, because we're going to visit this slide again, and I apologize, there's so many words on there, but I really wanted you to be able to understand each one of these places. And I shouldn't say that they're levels, they're just places and spaces that we are. And it's okay wherever you are, because later we're going to talk about how do you grow through that level? How do you get to the next level or the next space if you so choose to? So, here is a picture of a typical picture if you would see it in New York, walking down the street, and look at all of the stuff coming at you all at once. I mean, this is crazy. And if you paid attention to all of it, you would lose your mind. So research actually says that we receive about 11 million pieces of information every moment. 11 million. But out of that 11 million, how much can we actually process every moment? What do you think? I mean, it's more than 2. It is more than 2, but here it is, 40 at any moment. This is a good thing and a bad thing. The good part of it is that good thing we have this unconscious bias where we can just naturally move or whatever without even thinking about it. I mean, think about cavemen when they went out hunting. If they didn't have the unconscious bias and they heard the rustling in the leaves, they probably would go towards it. Oh, let me go see what's over here. Yeah, no, see, he would be gone or she would be gone, right? Because they don't have that unconscious bias. That unconscious bias sometimes can save us. That unconscious bias can keep us sane. Without it, we would pay attention to the tag in the back of our shirt the rims of our glasses, the tops of our shoes, the humming sound in the room, people chatting and talking. But because we're able to bias and move, we can focus on specific areas. So that's how it works. So that's where that 99.99996% comes in. That's how much of it is unconscious. So we're never going to get to a place where we can say, I don't have any more unconscious bias. That's just not going to happen. And it's okay. But know this also. Give yourself grace and give other people grace when their unconscious bias impacts you. Because sometimes we're not aware of it. But when it's brought to your attention, you can't just leave it at, well, that wasn't my intention. You've got to be able to say, wait a minute, that is not what I was intending to happen, but because it has, let's figure out what we can do about it. You know, when I talked about the sea of people in here, and I said, you don't see many brown, right? It's not because I believe that it was your intention, let's not have brown skin in the room. I don't believe that. But there's an impact for all of us. So these are just things that we must consider. So I want to share with you a little story. Something in my life. It's a two-part story. The first part is that back in January 1977, I saw the most amazing miniseries of my life. Now, I grew up in Colorado Springs, so this was never told to me. And it was a movie, or not a movie, but a series called Roots. And ever since I saw that, all I wanted to do was go to Africa. I wanted to go to the motherland one day. In the meantime, years later, I'm talking maybe 3-4 years ago, I decided to find out my ancestry. So you know how they have those programs like Ancestry.com. And I found out that I was 27% Nigerian. I was like, what? So last year, it just so happened that I was invited to go to Nigeria and speak. So when they called me, I said, oh, and by the way, I am 27% Nigerian. They were like, oh my gosh, you're Nigerian. You're going to meet the king. I said, I'm going to do the what? You're going to meet the king. So when I get there on a Saturday morning, there's 4 women ready to braid my hair so my head is going in different directions. There's another woman on a sewing machine making all these clothes. She's like, you're going to meet the king. You're going to meet the king. I said, oh my gosh. So when I got ready, I walked up and I get there. And I'm getting ready to meet the king. And they're throwing flowers everywhere. And he comes out and he says, your name is Adejanke Lewis. Regina Adejanke Lewis. And I said, Ada who, what, why? I was ready to come home and change my nameplate on my office. You have to put Adejanke on there. I get home and I said, okay, let me see what else I am so I can go there too. So I go to type it in and it says, there's been an update. You have a 0 Nigerian. I was like, don't tell the king. So look, if you're recording this, take that part off, right? Could not believe it. But anyway, the other part I really want to tell you, that was just so funny, I just had to tell it. But anyway, my uncle and I decide that we're going to really work on our family history. And we found out that my ancestry grandmother was enslaved in America by a Mr. Dixon, a white slave owner from North Carolina. And I also found out where the house was, and it's still standing to this day. So I took my mother and my son, and we went and we walked through the house, and it is in amazing order. And then the slave quarters in the back. I found out that Mr. Dixon impregnated my grandmother. And when I walked past the bedroom, I knew it didn't take place there, but I was furious. I felt like justice wasn't served, that we are still suffering today, that we are all dealing with what's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. I was very disturbed. When you hear that story, how does it make you feel? How do you think that my ancestry grandfather felt when he was conceived that way? It's not right. So I wanted to do something about it. Now, I told you I was from the military, right? So I had things to do. So I marched on down to the library. I was like, I'm going to find somebody who is living today that's connected with Mr. Dixon, because somebody's going to pay. I know, right? Like, really, what am I going to do? So as I went down and I did the research, I found out that Mr. Dixon did not rape my grandmother. He loved my grandmother. He married my grandmother. He risked his white life because he knew slave lives mattered, and he opened up his home as a school for slaves to read and write, to learn to be soldiers, teachers, and nurses. It is our unconscious bias that made us feel like there was something wrong. We just believed there was something wrong. Even I did. And it worried me for many, many days and nights, because I started thinking unconsciously, when I see a white man, do I have a negative impact on them? You could be my brother, my sister, my uncle. You could be related to me. So I had to check myself. We all have a responsibility. Every single one of us has a responsibility. It may not be our intention to have a negative impact on someone, but there is a difference between intention and impact. We teach that at the Center for Creative Leadership. And if a person says, you impacted me this way, or you didn't listen, or you made me feel devalued, and it's not your intention, you can tell them that, but it's very important that you realize that it still does not fix the impact. That there needs to be a deeper conversation, a courageous conversation, something that we could do that would be different. Then people would have a sense of belonging. The impact, the positive impact of having this awareness of unconscious bias means that there would be more fairness, respected spaces, learning opportunities, as well as teachable moments. Because that's what we need. We all need that. So now that you have heard and kind of see how this works, and that you don't have to beat yourself up because you have unconscious bias, where do you want to be? How do you want to grow through these different levels? Where would you like to be? What would it take to get from tolerant to, say, accept, or to intentional or amend? So I want to give you a few things that you could actually do. So, if you want to grow through your unawareness, pay attention to your feelings. What do I mean by that? When something doesn't feel right, you say, I don't feel comfortable sitting next to this person. Ask yourself why. When something feels comfortable or spot on, ask yourself what could be missing, Every year we used to have, parties for work. This was years ago, another job. And we would have parties, and it would always be a Western barbecue. And people couldn't wait. Oh, look, we gonna do this. And they were all happy. And I'd get my cowboy hat and my boots because, yes, I could do it. But what they weren't thinking about is, could we change it up and maybe do something that other people like, different types of music, different type of food, sometime, somewhere? But because it felt so good, like, everybody loves this, that's not true. I was on the elevator this morning with all that was going on, and believe me, I did not look like this. I'm just letting you know. Woo! I was like, they were like, "Are you Dr. Lewis?" I said, "No, she's upstairs." She, eyelash was sitting this way. I mean, it was bad. But I got in the elevator, and I saw this woman get on, and she goes, "So everybody's going to the 7th floor?" It was her she wasn't even thinking. No, we all got different floors, but it was where she was going, so she figured everybody else was going there. I was like, "No, I'm going to the 8th floor." I was glad I wasn't on the 12th because I would have had lots of stairs to climb, and I got a Peloton at home. I can do that later. Yeah. So anyway, you do that. Learn what unconscious bias is, like we're doing today. Now, if you want to move through tolerant, then understand that unconscious bias is actually normal, and be open to the idea that we all of us have bias. Learn, understand, and increase your awareness of other cultures. So learn about other cultures. Have conversations. Now, if you got a question that you shouldn't be asking, right? Build a relationship first. And then ask. Because, people ask some question, it's like, really? Yeah. Avoid using your intention as the explanation for the impact of your unconscious bias. Except, don't beat yourself up. When it's pointed out to you, don't beat yourself up. And that's hard to do. Because I was doing this very training, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, "You attacked me." And he was going at it. And I know I didn't attack him. And especially I didn't have any intention on it. So I was mad. And he was telling me, and I was trying to keep my face together because I was like, "I just taught you how to do this, so now I got to do it." Gee, me Christmas. But as we listened and we worked and he saw that I really was listening to him, he kind of eased up on me. And then later he said, "Okay, you just spelled a word wrong on your PowerPoint presentation." It was like, woo! Anyway, review your internal conversations. What are you saying to yourself? Who's your people that you talk to on a weekly basis that's in your cell phone? What do they look like? Maybe you need to diversify that a little bit. Analyze who you trust and are most comfortable with. Consciously think about the effects of unconscious bias. Take SEED Level 2 training. So what I'm doing right now is giving you a brief overview of SEED Level 1. So SEED stands for Cultural Excellence, Ideas, and Discussions. And so there's 3 levels. Level 1 is awareness, Level 2 is application, and Level 3 is ally activist. Intentional, identify your biases, both positive and negative, and examine their potential impact. Focus more on people than process. Well, this is just the way we do things around here. We'll change it, adjust it. Invite others to help broaden your perspectives and ask for feedback on potential preference patterns. So, if you prefer to be over here, start questioning yourself and start going on the other side. I know I keep being over here, but this thing is kind of weird right here. I'm just saying that was a really good excuse. That was my intention. Let me just walk on over here. Develop a core value system that focuses on equity. Now, there's a difference between equality and equity. Equality means that everybody can be here, that you're offering it for everybody. But equity is that you are assuring that however you need to adjust it, you adjust it so that people have the opportunity to get there. So I know that in the Rotary Club that I belong to, they have had some discussions on how can we bring people in that can't afford to do these dues. Because we still want everybody to have this experience. That's equality. But to get them in the door and to get them here, we might have to adjust. Wayne Bland did that for me. So that's what I mean with the difference. 3 more. Amend. Actively listen to others' feedback about your preferences. Ask yourself what biases played a part in your decision. So when you make a decision, ask, is there some bias here? Broaden your viewpoint when you identify a bias you have and learn more about that idea. Counter stereotypes, seek different perspectives, and take the intercultural development inventory, which is an inventory that there are people around the world that does, including myself, that ask you several questions to see if you're more monocultural, you focus on your culture mostly, or multicultural, where you're starting to look at others, or intercultural. And it really tells you where you believe you are and where you should be, and then it tells you how to go through it. Then seek cultural competency coaching. So I'm an intercultural coach, so that's another option. Be authentic as an ally. Acknowledge the problem and the challenge. Admit you don't have all the answers. It's okay. It is okay. Conduct a thorough assessment of the problem. Educate yourself on the issues and keep your unconscious bias in check. Accept the feeling of discomfort as normal. And then lastly is the activist. Become a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer. Create diversity trainings. Be part of a diversity panel discussion. Engage in constructive conversations and identify possible biases in others. And speak up and speak out. Then you can also take Seed Level 3. Those are those little plugs. It was just a great place to put this stuff. So why is it so difficult to recognize our own unconscious bias? It's our environment, our experiences, our expectations, our own conscious biases. It's difficult. But what can we do about it? How can we actually find it? Well, we got to think about where we got stuck. We've got to get creative and think of other ways. Right now you see a paintbrush. And if I asked you to write a list of different things you could use this paintbrush for besides painting, what could you think of? And people would go through their minds and they would have, anywhere from 2 to about 6. And then if I say, now talk to your neighbor, ask them their ideas, you could probably come up with 20, 25, and it's amazing. Beer bottle opener, meat tenderizer, floss. Hey, we could come up with some other things, but that's what we do. So I want to get towards the end of this presentation in terms of, when you have seen or have been impacted by unconscious bias, how to have a courageous conversation. It's hard to fly when something is weighing you down, and that is what courageous conversations is all about. Our working definition of that is a conversation where you speak up and express how you feel about an issue that weighs you down. It's not easy to do, but if we can create that culture, we can make a change and we can make a difference that can really impact others. So why do we need to have the conversation? To increase validity of information, to increase respect and connection, and to increase commitment. Now, there's a couple of lists, and I realize they're on here. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that those lists are provided to you so that you can have them, okay? So it's no problem. The other is that when you are talking, your courageous conversation has to have a balance that we call a 738-55. And we talk about this in psychology, sociology, communication classes. And basically, that the message, only 7% of that is really the spoken words. You have to look at the 38% that's the voice and tone, and 55% that's the body language. So if I say, I am really enjoying myself, need I say more? Right. So you got to line those two things up. So here's some helpful prompts. When people are disagreeing and your perspective is different from another person, instead of getting offended, you called me, you said, you did, you could say, help me to understand. What might I be missing? Or what exactly do you mean? Or where do we agree? It's a great meeting space. And these processes, you have to, first of all, start to discuss reasonings that led you to your view and provide examples and illustrations. Those two people typically do, but we really need to focus on this third one. Treat your own views as hypotheses rather than a taken for granted truth. Because just because you Googled it does not make it so. Listen deeply, especially when views differ from your own. Share control of the conversation, share the problems in the problem-solving process, and require accountability for collective decisions. These are things that we can actually do. This is just a quick snapshot of this unconscious bias. But I believe that it's the baseline of all of this diversity work that we're doing. You cannot come in and tell me about another cultural group and expect me to understand or get it if I don't even understand my own biases. So the seed is the foundation. To understand that first, then let's start to move and start to see, how do we build a sense of belonging? A sense of belonging is one where naturally you can feel the energy in the room because there's somebody who is like you. There is somebody who is like me. That we can have conversations, that we can respect one another, that we can feel one another. I don't care what nobody says. I love me some Rotary. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Lewis. I think you can see why I asked Dr. Lewis if she would be willing to come up here and speak for 10 minutes.
Well.
High Country Pets has a tradition of handing out a little gift bag that has representation from each district. This year we added a new district in Utah. And in this little packet for her, this nice backpack, are a collection of things from each of the districts with little notes on them saying what they might be and where they came from. So on behalf of High Country Pets, Dr. Lewis, Regina, there you go.
I
Thank
love
you.
presents. I love. Thank you.
Stay right here a second. I also want to mention that there will be a donation made in her name to the foundation. So now you can go to